Hello, hello, guys. Welcome, everyone. How are you guys all doing today? I want to see down below. How's everyone going? I want to see in the comments. How you guys all been? Everyone doing well? Let me see. How is everyone doing? Everyone good? Awesome. Lovely. Well, in case you haven't seen me before, my name is Anastasia. I'm one of our tutors here at Scholarly. If you're from Scholarly, lovely to see you again. But if you're new, it is lovely to meet you. So, what we're going to be looking at today, we have a very important and a very exciting webinar today, okay? And what we're actually going to be looking at is how to manage your time in selective. So we're going to be looking at English, we're going to be looking at maths, we're going to be looking at thinking skills. We won't have questions today, but we'll just be looking specifically at how you can actually make sure that you finish the test. Because as I'm sure a lot of you guys know, it's pretty difficult a lot of the time to actually finish the test. Like time management can be hard in selective. So I'll be giving you guys my best tips on each different section, and we'll be having a look at that. Can everyone see me? Some people are saying they can't see me. Before I start, can everyone see my screen? There should be a spotlight so everyone can see my screen. But if you have any issues with that, let me know. Awesome. Alrighty. Well, with that being said, let's get right into it. We'll start off, as I said, with English, and then we'll keep on going. Awesome. And if you have any questions, of course, let me know later on, okay? I think it should be fine for everyone. But if is it blurry for people? I think for most people it's okay. But if it's blurry for you, it might be an individual issue. Okay, so maybe try to leave the Zoom, join again. Of course, let you back in. But hopefully for most people it's all good. Alrighty, let's get started, guys. Let's do it. So, very first thing I want to show you guys today is some general tips. Okay, in general, how do we actually make sure we succeed in selective? So, the very first thing you have to know, of course, is the amount of time you have in selective will vary for each test. And I'll be running you through, of course, what the time limit is for each one, how much time you have per question. But the general strategy is this. Yes, we can average out how much time you have for each section. But the most important thing is that some questions are going to be faster to do, some questions are going to be slower to do. So you need to make sure that you're not wasting time on the really easy questions. Yes, there will be inevitably some questions that might take you longer than a minute, let's say in thinking skills, because they're designed to be harder. But if you can do the very easy questions in way less than a minute, you should have more than enough time to tackle those tricky questions as well, even if you get stuck. In general, what I recommend is that you actually leave any question that you can't do, you skip it, you move on, you come back to it after. And the reason I recommend that is because every question's worth the same. I'm sure you guys know this. It's not like the harder questions are worth more marks than the easier ones. They're all worth the same number of marks. Okay? They're all worth the same, which means whether you get the really easy ones right or the really hard ones right, they're each worth a mark. You might as well get the easy ones right that you 100% know you've gotten correct, and then you have a 1 in 4 chance of getting the harder ones if you're making a complete guess. I'll get into guesses later, because actually there's never really a situation where you should have a 1 in 4 chance. Usually you can eliminate answer options and then guess from there, but I'll run you through that in a sec, okay? So that's the general tip that goes for maths, for English, and for thinking skills. That goes for everything. Is that making sense so far? Can I get a crystal clear, #crystal clear from everyone in the chat? Awesome. Good work, guys. Awesome. Alrighty. Let's keep going then. Good work. Now, let's jump into English. So here's the time you have for English. You have 40 minutes, 30 questions. Okay, so that means approximately 1 minute, 8 seconds per question, right? It's not exact, but approximately just over a minute per question. With English, it's not really that useful to consider the time per question, because generally what you have is 4 texts. So I'm going to be running you guys through how to actually manage your time in each text type, because it will vary depending on the text type. So key thing you got to remember, and this goes for English and for thinking skills, there are no assumptions whatsoever. It doesn't matter what question you're doing, unless you saw it in the text, you do not choose it as a correct answer option. And a lot of the time, you can actually save yourself time in these exams by eliminating any answer option that is an assumption, eliminating any answer option that you did not clearly see being mentioned in the text. Even if it makes sense in real life outside the text, unless you saw it in the text, do not choose it. Okay, that's the most important thing to remember. You only are being tested on the text. You're not being tested on your general knowledge or anything like that. You're being tested on how well you can actually retain information and understand information from a text. So, in general, what are the two text types that take longer to complete. These text types are a bit chunky, as I'm sure you guys have all noticed, and those are fiction and comparative, particularly comparative. Like, for example, in the comments, you can tell me who's noticed that comparative can take quite a while. You guys noticed that before? Yeah, it's definitely the longest text by far. And the reason why it takes the longest time is because there's 2 texts you have to read, and each text is quite long. Even though, for example, evaluation has 4 text types, they're pretty short. Comparative, 2 pretty long texts. So let me give you a brief overview in case you haven't really familiarized yourself with the different text types you might get selected. Let me give you a brief overview as to what each text type actually is, okay? The first one is fiction. And that goes without saying. You have one passage, one fictional passage. It's usually an excerpt from an actual real life novel, most likely a novel that you haven't read. They try to pick novels that people haven't read before so that no one really has an unfair advantage in any of the questions. But in reality, even if you have read the novel, you're not going to get an advantage because remember, you only use what is in the text. So you have one passage. Comparative means you have 2 passages. And each of these passages is on a similar topic. Not exactly the same topic, but pretty similar. Now, these text types, they're generally quite fast to do. And let me run you through why. And as I said, we're going to go through each of them in a lot of detail. So, poetry, pretty quick. Why? Because poems are quite short. So this is literally just when they give you a poem. Usually the poem is about 2 stanzas long, sometimes 3 stanzas. Obviously, guys, I don't actually know what will be in the 2024 selective because I'm not writing it, but it's usually the length that you see in a select test, okay? Close passage. These are your fill in the blank questions. These are super fast to do, even though the text can be quite long, and I'll show you the strategy that I use for these afterwards. Evaluation. This is when you get 4 mini texts, 4 little texts, again, on a similar topic. So, for example, you might have 4 texts about technology in general, and then each text might talk about a different type of technology. Like one talks about laptops, one talks about PlayStation, one talks about whatever. Right? So that's generally what you see in these. Now, the last one is summary sentences, which is where they literally give you a couple of paragraphs and they say, hey, I want you to match this paragraph to the correct sentence, which summarizes it. And you're pretty much just matching. So those ones are also pretty quick to do. I will show you all of these as well. Okay, so let's do it. Let's have a look. Let's have a look at this one. First one, fiction and comparative. These are the chunky ones. These are the ones that take time. So how do you make sure you actually do them fast? Well, skimming is possible for these. I know some people prefer to skim, others prefer to read. What I have generally noticed is this. The people that do tend to skim through these very fast actually end up forgetting important information. Then they have to go back to the text and read it twice. And in general, I don't recommend reading it twice. Quite simply, you don't have enough time to read it twice. It's a pretty time-pressured exam, as I'm sure you guys all know. So I would prefer you take a little bit longer reading it the first time and you only read it once. That's it. You don't read it twice. You don't read it 3 times. Once you read it once, it's in your head. As I'm reading, I'm always looking for keywords. If you've been in any of my classes before, you've seen me do this. I just underline important things so that when I go back to the text while I'm answering the questions, I know exactly where I'm looking for. And that also saves me a lot of time. And this is very, very, very important. Make sure your answer options match. You'll see this a lot in comparative and fiction questions, guys, because the texts are quite long. Usually what they actually ask is they try to combine different things. They try to ask the same thing in slightly different wording, but it's pretty much the same question over and over again. Sometimes even 3 of the questions are so similar that you can use one of the previous ones to answer the next 2. So if you want to save yourself some time, let's say you're a little bit unsure about a question, but you know you got the previous one right. See if you can use the previous few questions to answer that next one. That cuts you down a lot of time. So everyone clear with this? I want to see down below in the chat who is clear once again with these tips so far. As I said, these are the longer texts, so definitely you should be expecting that fiction comparative will take a bit longer than the others. That's fine. It's not going to be a perfect split between all 4 texts, but that is the general gist. These will take a little bit longer. Okay, awesome. Alrighty, let's keep going then. Here are some more texts. Poetry. Said poems, pretty short, but they might have some complex questions. So from the other faster texts that I mentioned earlier, these are probably the least fast. Even though they're very quick to read, like reading a poem doesn't take that long, the questions have the potential to be a little bit trickier. And the reason is because they usually focus on testing a deeper understanding or a deeper meaning of the text. So I'm sure you guys have noticed this when you've done questions as well. Typically what they ask the poems is, oh, what does this line in the poem do, and what technique is used here, and what's the significance of this quote? What metaphor is used here? So a lot of the time, they're not asking you for the literal meaning of the poem, they're asking you for the deeper or figurative meaning. So once again, you're checking for consistency. That's the very, very, very first important thing. But the best way to save yourself time with poetry questions is, as you read, you think about the deeper meaning, okay? As you're reading, you're thinking about the deeper meaning. It's usually 90% of the time way deeper than it initially seems, okay? Also, what you'll notice for this, guys, also what you'll actually notice, and guys, make sure we're not using the whiteboard. Oh, I don't want to see anyone using the whiteboard. Thank you. Also, what we notice with these, as I was saying, is the fact that the title can give you a lot of information. A lot of the times, the title of a poem isn't really that clear, but once you start reading, you'll be able to make that connection. So if you're ever in a situation where you don't understand a poem and it seems like you're wasting too much time trying to figure out what's going on, use the title, go stanza by stanza, and use the actual questions to help you figure out the meaning. Once you figure out the meaning, they're very quick, the questions. The meaning is the hard part to get, okay? So try to figure out the meaning first. How do you do it? You look at, in general, understanding a deeper meaning, understanding any symbolism, any important significance in the poem, look at the title, and also use the actual questions themselves. The question might say something like, oh, in this text, how does this character do that? And then you'll see from the question actually explaining what the character does, you'll start to put the pieces together in your head. Now, closed passages. I'm sure you guys, if you've been at Scholarly before, you've most likely heard of CIOCCP. Yeah, I won't go into that too much today because it doesn't have to do with time, but that is the strategy that I use to answer these. Here's, though, how I incorporate that into saving time. So, first of all, here's what I do. I read the first paragraph. So as I'm sure you guys have seen before, closed passages, they have a bunch of paragraphs, and each paragraph usually has a blank. And you have about 6 or 7 blanks to answer, right? I'll read the first paragraph in full. Either you can skim it if you're really, really fast at reading, or you can just read it properly, okay? And so as you go through that, once you have a look at that very first paragraph, review every single answer option. Why do I look at every single answer option? Why don't I stop as soon as I found the correct one for the first blank? Because once I've looked at every single answer option, guys, I know exactly what options I have for every other question that's left after it. So once I've checked all the answer options and I've picked the first correct one, what I can do from that point onwards is just speed through the other questions. Because I'm reading the second paragraph and I already know what the correct answer option is because I've already seen what the correct options are, okay? So by actually sort of predicting what is going to go in each blank, you can do these way quicker than you'd expect. You could probably do a closed passage in like 5 minutes. It's actually quite fast once you've been able to get this strategy down. So you can use your general strategies like using the Oreo method, look at the sentence before, look at the sentence afterwards. But in general, once you've read every single answer option and you know what's available to you, it's much, much, much faster to answer the rest of the blanks without even finishing reading the rest of the paragraphs, because you can very easily tell what's going to fit into what paragraph. Okay? Now, nearly there. Evaluation texts. As I said, you've got 4 shorter texts. They're much quicker to read. And these questions are super fast paced. So this is probably the fastest text in all of English. This takes the least amount of time. I think it's pretty quick to do. And the way I like to do these questions, guys, to make them very, very, very time efficient is understand all the texts, find differences in the texts. We don't care about similarities. We only really care about differences. And the reason we care about differences is because what you have to do is you have to match one text to one answer option. So you don't care if multiple texts address something. You only care about what's unique to one text. So by looking at what's unique to one text and understanding the text as you've read them, you can literally speed through these. These are very, very, very fast to do. You can tell me down below, have you guys noticed that these are super fast? So in general, you're not going to take like 10 minutes for comparative, and then 10 minutes for poetry, and then 10 minutes for close, and then 10 minutes for evaluation. Evaluation should only take you less than 5 minutes. Let's say something like close will take you definitely under 10 minutes. Even if in the worst case comparative takes you a little bit more than 10, this should balance it out. And that's the idea. Spend a little bit more time on the trickier things, sure, but this stuff should be a time saver for you. So it's not necessarily a perfectly even time split, but that's the general way that I'd approach it. Now, maths. Let's have a look at some maths. Let's have a look. Now, time changes again. 40 minutes, 35 questions. It still is around 1 minute, 8 seconds per question, but again, don't rely on that too much. So with maths, do I need algebra? Is the number one question I see kids asking. Do I have to do algebra to get the questions right? And so on and so forth. Typically, the answer is no, okay? Most of the time, what you'll see in the selective test is that the questions are actually designed either for a quick guess and check or for some sort of alternative strategy to be used. So I'll give you an example of this. I don't know if you guys have seen a question like this before, but here's one that I like to think about. Have you guys ever seen a question that has like a pool and they have a walkway around the pool? It's a pretty classic setup. Have you guys seen something like this before? So basically, there's people swimming in this pool and there's a walkway around the pool. And typically what the question might do, just to show you the setup, is it'll give you, let's say, the perimeter or the area of the pool, and it will ask you to work out the area of the walkway given that information. So what some people tend to do is they'll say, oh, this is the length, this is the width, this is the length plus a mystery number, the width plus a mystery number. And they start doing all this algebra and expanding stuff and blah, blah, blah. But in reality, you don't need that. All I would do for this question, I split it into something smaller. I'd split it into these little squares on the side, which they don't really look like squares in my diagram, but you get the point. So I'd look at these 4 areas first, and then I can find these areas here by looking at the original length and width of the pool itself. That is how I would generally answer a question like this, and it completely avoids all algebra. So typically, there are ways to avoid the algebra. Of course, that will depend on each question, and definitely obviously join more scholarly classes if you want an in-depth on each question type. But today we're only focusing on time. So in terms of time, usually you don't really need algebra, okay? There might be some questions that ask it, but very, very, very rarely. So if you find yourself wasting time on that, it is not necessary. Some of our questions at Scholarly will be a bit harder than what you might see in selective. So we might require some algebra, but in general, you won't need it, okay? So fast algebra users, you can use it, but I don't always recommend it just because it might take you a little bit more time. If you think that personally you're super speedy at algebra, not a problem, go ahead and use it. But for the vast majority of you guys, not really necessary. Okay, makes sense? Awesome. Alrighty, next. Guess and check. This is also very useful in maths. How do you guess and check quickly? Okay, typically, as I'm sure you guys know, there's 4 or even 5 answer options. How do I make sure that I'm not wasting my time guessing and checking? Let's say the correct answer was E in one question. Am I going to check A and then check B and check C and check D and check E? No, right? There's no point in doing that. There's absolutely 0 point in doing that, okay? So let me explain how you can actually figure out where to start with guessing and checking. You never need to test all the answer options. There's usually some sort of hint in the question indicating where to start. And generally, what I've noticed that hint is it actually depends on how big or how small you expect the answer option to be. So check, for example, the differences in the numbers given in each question. That will typically allow you to determine whether I should actually start from a really small number for my guess and check or from a really big number for a guess and check. And even if, let's say, you're completely out of time, like you have no time to do this question, and let's say my numbers were this. Obviously, I'm making these up. Something like this, right? And let's say that I used some logic in that question and I figured out that I was looking for a very small answer option, then I would just guess option E. I could easily narrow it down to D and E, and now I have a much higher chance of getting it correct than by guessing something like option A. So that's generally how we guess and check. As I said, today we're focusing on time, but if you're interested in more specific math tips, we can have a look at some more things like that in the future as well. Also, identify your own personal weaknesses, okay? Different people are good at different topics. Others are better at other topics, right? You need to be able to know what you're really good at and what you struggle a little bit more at. So skip and save the time-consuming questions for last. As I said, every question's worth the same. So there's actually no point in you wasting your time on a really hard question. and then missing 5 easy marks that you could have gotten if you just hadn't wasted your time on that one question. No point at all. So I'll tell you what I've commonly noticed are the very time-consuming questions. Again, this will depend on you as an individual. What I've generally noticed around whole cohorts is that what typically takes people the most time is speed, distance, time questions, and also some types of ratio questions, usually those that involve a total ratio. So generally, what I like to do before I actually sit there and waste my time answering a question is I scan through it, I look at each part, and I'm like, okay, let me check, let me scan, let me evaluate. How complex do I think this question is going to be? I don't calculate it in my head, but I just break down the steps. For example, if it's, let's say, a profit calculation question, I might say, okay, to calculate profit, I have to calculate revenue and I have to calculate expenses. So then I break it down step by step in my head and I say to myself, does it look like a while to take? Is it going to take a long time to calculate revenue? Is it going to take a long time to calculate expenses? And once I figure out how long it's going to take, I'm like, okay, this question, I got to skip it. I'll do it later. Oh, this question's really easy. I'll do it now. Just a quick little 2-second scan in your head about the complexity of the question can help you figure out how to save some time. Now, last major time-saving tip for maths is assumptions. I did mention earlier, as I'm sure you guys all remember, that we never make any assumptions in English, okay? And we never make any assumptions in thinking skills. What happens in maths? In maths, you actually can assume sometimes. When can you assume? Let me explain. Well, you are allowed to assume if a question is actually asking you for a fraction of something or a percentage of something. Because here's why, okay? It's not just because Anastasia said that, there's a reason. Let's say that in the question there were 1,000 people, and I had to work out what percentage of those people were male, right? Whether there's 1,000 people, whether there's 5,000 people, whether there's 1,000,000 people, in the end, I'm going to divide by the total number of people anyway to actually work out how many people there are that are male. So it doesn't matter what number you initially have as the total. As soon as you see a question that says, what fraction of this, what percentage of this, you can guess any number you want. So how do I actually guess this? Typically, the number that I choose is 100. That's the easiest number usually, especially when you're working with percentages. Because as I'm sure you guys know, very easy to find a percentage of 100. Like, for example, let's do a quick little easy test in the comments. What's 20% of 100? Who can tell me? Very easy question. 20% of 100 is 20. Awesome. Exactly. So that's why I like to pick 100 as a number, because it's really easy to do questions with. However, if you have some ugly fractions, let's say your fraction is a third, or it's a ninth, or something like that, probably not too useful to use 100. Why? Because what's 1/3 of 100? It's 33.33333, and then you're stuck with these ugly decimals. So in that case, I'd pick another number. Let's say maybe I could pick 90, and I could say 1/3 of 90 is 30, right? So be clever about this. It will obviously, the guess will depend on the actual numbers in the question. Generally, 100 is a pretty good guess, but that's generally what I see. Also, one last tip is, with some calculations, guys, you actually don't need to complete them. Because as I'm sure you guys all know, the test is multiple choice. So you don't have to complete every calculation. As soon as you see you've calculated the last digit and there's only one answer option that has that last digit, circle it and move on. You don't have to check every digit. You've gotten the last one, you've gotten it. You can move on to the next one. So, is everyone once again crystal clear on all of these tips? Awesome. Let's move on to thinking skills, guys. We're doing amazing. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. Thinking skills time it is. So, thinking skills, I've noticed, is probably the one where people struggle the most with time. It can be quite tricky to finish a thinking skills test on time. So, they do give you a bit more time here. 40 minutes, 40 questions. You only have 1 minute per question exactly in this case, because it's 40 minutes, 40 questions. So once again, there will be some questions here that will take you less than 30 seconds. There will be some questions that will take you 1.5 minutes. You need to make sure that you can actually balance it out. That is generally what we're looking for. So, first of all, there will be quite a few thinking skills calculations. There will be questions in thinking skills that actually involve you doing some maths in the process, and it's actually a good chunk. So I definitely recommend that you guys have a look at the 2023 selective test. It is actually on the Scholarly YouTube. So if you haven't seen the solutions, I was the one who actually went through, did all the solutions. If you want to see the style of questions that they asked, how many involved calculations, how many involved whatever, you can have a look at that. It's completely free to watch. It's on YouTube for all you guys to see. Okay. But you'll notice that there were actually quite a few questions that involved calculations. So remember, this is a thinking skills exam, not a maths exam, which means minimal calculations should be required. If you're actually noticing that you're taking ages doing calculations and thinking skills, you're probably not taking the best approach. You've probably missed something that would have let you do it faster. So avoid lengthy calculations. You got to seek some quicker methods. Again, typically the best way to do this is by either elimination or by estimation. So typically, you might have 4 answer options, right? I can very easily eliminate an answer option by seeing again if it's too big or too small compared to the relative numbers that I have in my question. That's elimination. What about estimation? Let's say you've narrowed down, it's not A, it's not B. Now I have to pick between C and D. How can I pick between them without doing every single calculation? Let's say I had to work out 87% of a number. That's so ugly to work out. I'm going to round out. I'm going to make it about 90%. I'm going to find 90% of that number. And then I know that it's going to be a bit less than 90%. So I'm not going to sit there and do calculations with a lot of ugly decimals, with a lot of ugly fractions, because typically in thinking skills, you're only estimating. You don't need to do every single calculation exactly. So that is what I'm looking for when I say estimation. Once again, as a reminder, you guys, with English, no assumptions here whatsoever. That's the biggest trap in thinking skill. That's what most people get wrong. They begin to assume things that, again, are true in real life, but might not be true in the text. So, for example, you'll see really silly questions of thinking skills. They'll give you something and they'll be like, all cats are dogs. I'm sure you guys all know that in real life, cats and dogs are not the same thing, right? But they'll give you random things like this in thinking skills to try to confuse you. Do not include any personal bias. Do not include your own opinions. All you have to do is analyze what information was given to you. So quickly eliminate incorrect answer options by noticing any assumptions. As soon as you notice something that was not stated in the text, cross it out. Even if you can't answer the question properly, you've now much got a higher chance of actually getting it right. Now, let's look at some more specific question types that tend to be a bit time consuming. One of the most common question types that comes up is these strengthening, weakening questions. I'm sure you guys have noticed them. They basically give you a paragraph and they're like, oh, what answer option strengthens that argument or weakens that argument? And then you have to go through 4 answer options. So generally, the strategies that I like to use for this is I like to look for the conclusion, look for the reason. If I'm strengthening, support conclusion, support reason. If I'm weakening, weaken conclusion, weaken reason. By checking everything against the reason, I'm always able to find the one answer option that works. Because often you'll see multiple answers that strengthen, multiple answers that weaken, and then you get stuck and you start wasting time and you're thinking, okay, both of these weaken. What's the best one? By immediately identifying these 2 things, as soon as you're reading the text, you don't have to go back, you don't have to reread, do them as you read the text. And that means you can actually save yourself a lot of really valuable time by not having to go back and now try to differentiate between 2 answer options. Alrighty? Now, some logic questions. How do I answer logic questions? Again, these are super common thinking skills. Well, first of all, you've got to understand the difference between these very similar but very important words. If, only if, and only if. So do you guys know the difference between these words? Let me see in the chat. They sound very similar, right? Does everyone know the difference between these? Who can tell me? Do they know? If you don't know, that's okay. You guys know? Sort of? Yes? Okay, awesome. Well, I'll give you a quick little rundown because I'm seeing a lot of people know, but in case for some of you guys that don't know, how do we do this? A question that says if means that if something happens, something else will happen. Do not ever assume that the converse works. So if I have A giving me B, I can't assume that it's going to work backwards. I'll give you a simple example. If it rains, then I will bring an umbrella. Okay, that makes sense. If it rains, I'm going to have my umbrella open. But does it make sense to go backwards? If I have my umbrella open, then it will rain. Doesn't make any sense, does it? Just because I opened my umbrella doesn't mean it's going to start magically raining. I can't control the weather. So don't ever assume that the backwards works. And usually that lets you eliminate a lot of answer options, saves you a lot of time. Okay. Also, The contrapositive, if you have a logic question that has 4 answer options, the correct one is usually the contrapositive, which means I flip the original statement and I add the word not. I negate that statement, okay? Again, you'll see this a lot more in our thinking skills classes. We'll look at what that means specifically, but you can literally eliminate 3 out of 4 answer options that don't use this idea correctly, okay? Only if, what does only if mean? Only if means there's no other reason why this could happen. This is the only reason why something could happen. And lastly, if and only if actually means that your argument goes both ways. So if and only if means A gives me B and B gives me A. So if you have if and only if, the question becomes super easy because you can actually go both ways. Last thing you got to check to save yourself some time is modality. Make sure that the modality, in other words, the strength of the argument or the certainty of the argument matches the certainty of the answer option. Okay, so as soon as you see a text that says must, and then you see an answer option that says could, it's gone. Eliminate it, get rid of it. It's not the right answer option. So that will save you a ton of time when you're having a look at something like this. Okay. Last thing, guys, last tip for today. I know I've given you a billion tips, but last one, diagrams. How can I use diagrams in thinking skills to save myself time? A lot of the time, you'll see that with thinking skills, they overload you with information. Have you guys ever felt this? You're reading a thinking skills paragraph in a question, you're like, oh my goodness, there's a billion things here. How am I supposed to organize all this info? They give you so much info, right? That's what they do. And they try to trap you guys. They try to make you feel overwhelmed so you can't answer the question. So how do you tackle this? What do you do? Now, if I see a question that has words like some of this, all of this, none of this, I begin to draw a Venn diagram. This allows me to organize things into categories. And the trick is with Venn diagrams, when I'm drawing a Venn diagram, I look at all possibilities. So I'll give you an example. Let's make one up right now, okay? I'll say that all cats are dogs. That means that if I have a circle here and everything inside this circle is cats, then I'm going to have a bigger circle with dogs, and every single thing inside the cat circle is inside the dog circle. There could still be dogs that are not cats, but every single cat is a dog, according to this statement. Again, makes no sense in real life, but according to this, okay? Then I might have a thing that says, some turtles are dogs. What could that look like? Well, let's draw a circle with turtles, okay? Turtles needs to overlap with dogs, as you can see. But here's the problem, guys. You can tell me, could turtles possibly overlap with cats? Could it possibly overlap with cats? Have a think. Could it possibly overlap with cats? I'm seeing people saying no, some people saying yes, a bit of debating. Alrighty. Well, the answer is actually it could overlap with cats. Why? Because cats are still dogs, according to this statement. So I could technically have something being in the cats and turtle circle, and it's still also inside the dog circle, which is completely okay. The problem is I don't know. I can't guarantee whether it touches cats or not. So what I do with these questions, guys, when I have to draw a Venn diagram, is I always draw all the possibilities. So when I'm checking the answer options, I'm like, yep, okay, this works. This doesn't work. I'm not making any guesses. I'm not making any silly mistakes. And I'm doing it really fast because I've already drawn the possibilities in my Venn diagram. Okay, is that making sense to everyone? A bit of a tricky question there. Everyone clear? Awesome. One last diagram that I generally tend to draw is ordering questions. There's 2 types of ordering questions you usually get, guys. There's one where you might have people in a straight line. So let's say people like this. And it's like this person came first, this person came last. You have to put them in an order. The other type of ordering question you might get is you have people sitting in a circular table and they're sitting like this. Let's say I've got like 8 people, however many people I've drawn here, 6, 7, 8 people in a circle, right? I would still draw a diagram for this because it takes way longer to sort out the people in your head. Unless you're really, really, really good at visualizing stuff in your head, typically people make silly mistakes and they have to restart the question in their head when they don't draw it. So I would recommend drawing it. It only takes a couple seconds. It's not like you have to make, an artistic painting here. My diagrams, as you can see, guys, are pretty rough. They're just random sketches, but it puts all the information together as quickly as I can. And that's all my amazing tips, guys. But any questions, any major questions, or is everyone all clear? If you guys have any like really, really, really important questions, because it's a bit difficult to see everyone's questions in the comments, you can obviously scan the QR code on my screen. As you can see, I've got a little QR code to reach out to us. Okay, it's a little WhatsApp QR code. It will just take you to WhatsApp, and you can actually reach out and have a look specifically at any questions you have, and we'll actually get back to you guys. Okay. Also, I have a very, very, very important announcement to let you guys know about before we actually head off. Are you guys ready to hear about my announcement? Everyone ready for the announcement? Let me see in the chat. Everyone ready? Awesome. Well, let me run you through it. What's my amazing announcement? Well, we do have a couple of amazing webinars coming up. I've got a really fun webinar coming up with you guys this Wednesday. So if you enjoyed today's webinar, make sure you're there. I would love to see you again. But if we have a look at the rest of it, okay, what am I seeing over here? I'm seeing that we have an amazing, amazing, amazing course coming up. Some amazing Zoom courses coming up over the holidays. So if you're interested in doing some Zoom classes, it's obviously less time than our usual time, just because I'm sure you guys all want to enjoy your break as well. But I've put the link in the chat on our Zoom courses. Make sure you actually go and have a look at them. Make sure you actually join ahead. Okay. Any questions you guys have for me? Any questions at all? Did you guys enjoy today's webinar? I want to see down below who had fun, who found it useful. Very important stuff today. So I really hope everyone took notes. Awesome. You guys were fantastic. Give yourselves a clap. Thank you all so much for coming today, everyone. You guys were fantastic. Have a lovely rest of your afternoon. Hopefully, I will see you all again very, very, very soon. Bye, guys.